Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. I hope everyone had a nice weekend and enjoying some nice weather throughout the country. I am here in Chicago, and we are very happy to finally have what we'd like to call our spring in June. So, for those of you that aren't familiar, Chicago likes to go from like 98, 99, and then the next day like 52, and then the next day like 71. So it's real fun to see what you're going to get, but we will take it over our winters. So hopefully everyone's doing okay. I know it's kind of a tough time in our world right now and in our industry with a lot going on. So we thought maybe today we would just kind of do an industry, kind of regulatory industry update, mostly industry, and just kind of talk about where we are, where we're going, what things have changed, what we can expect. We are going to spend some time talking about some different things here. Believe it or not, yes, we are going to talk about Ron again, but not for very long. We get so many questions every week on it that I wanted to do a little bit of an overview, even though we have talked about it a few times. We are just going to do a very high level. Same thing with RAN. A lot of people consistently asking us about RIN, what it is and how it works. So we'll talk about it. And if you think it's maybe going to be the new Ron, we are going to take a pretty deep dive into the housing market outlook and what we've seen, what the trends are, and what has been predicted. And I'm happy to say that a lot of it is good news in most parts of the country. We are going to talk about the mortgage market as well, mortgage applications and loans, and where we are with that stuff. Obviously, we have to talk about COVID-19 impact. Is it here to stay, meaning the changes that were implemented and what kind of changes we can expect to be required as we all kind of get back to a new norm? Remote working, is it permanent? Is it not? What are the benefits? We're going to talk about that as well. And then we are going to talk about the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau because contrary to what a lot of believe they actually do still exist. They've been pretty quiet during this. They've actually made taken some measures to allow for COVID-19, and we're going to talk about that as well. So per usual, if you have any questions, we love to get questions. Please type them into the question box. We have Ellen Kremel with SoftPro moderating that for me today. So she might jump in here and there to ask me some questions. So ask away. And if we by chance don't get to your question, don't worry. Like we do every week, we're going to do a Q&A follow up in our email with the link to this recording. People ask us all the time if they can go back and listen to it, and the answer is yes. All of the previous Saved You a Seat episodes are available on the SoftPro blog, which you can get to from our website, and you can also sign up to get notifications as we post all sorts of good information there for our industry. So please ask questions if you'd like, and we will try and get to as many as we can. And again, if we don't, we will follow up and send them out to everybody. Okay, so let's get Ron out of the way first. I only have a few things to talk about here. And again, I know it's kind of like, you know what I equate this to? Wire fraud. Remember when wire fraud became like the hot topic and everywhere you went and every webinar and every class and every topic was wire fraud, wire fraud, wire fraud. Rightfully so, it's still an issue, but you kind of get tired of hearing about the same thing. I kind of feel like that with Ron. Maybe not Rin, that's kind of new, but it is so important that everybody understands what's going on with Ron right now. Also that some things might stay, some things might change, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. So what I did was, to not overload us on Ron stuff, is I went and I took some of our most common questions we've gotten some previous webinars and episodes of Save You a Seat. And I just wanted to make sure everyone understood the differences and what is going on between the two here. So you have Ron and you have RIN. You have remote online notarization and you have remote in-person notary, which is RIN. Some people refer to it as AVN, which is audio-visual notarization. So the differences are pretty easy. A lot of people get confused, but as a high level, essentially a remote online notarization is digitally signing docs and digitally notarizing them, meaning everything's electronic, right? This is a preferred method for many lenders right now and a lot of states and municipalities. It is solely based on KBA, which is, knowledge-based authentication and credential analysis, meaning you have to answer questions to prove who you are. It's pretty safe. It's very similar to a credit report or a login that you might have with a banking or loan application where they ask you what street you lived on when you were 10, what was your first car, were any of these your following house payments or location. So essentially information that only you know that you should be able to answer. So that's why it's the preferred method. They feel that it's more secure. No FaceTime, Zoom, GoToMeeting, etc. Nothing like that. It's done generally through a third-party run software, and underwriters like to have a say in that as well, which we're going to talk about. So it's just a little bit more secure. And also, definitely the knowledge-based authentication really does make the lenders feel a little bit more at ease. So some states weren't ready. They weren't ready to adapt it. They didn't want to adapt it, maybe not just ready, but, and they, what they did was they added in what we're seeing called remote in-person notary, RIN. What RIN really is it allows you to not be face-to-face with a notary. It allows you to be at home and sign your documents or be wherever you are, and the notary be at a different physical location. So it's not an in-person, but it's not remote online notarization. And the biggest difference is while I am signing my documents, albeit whether it be electronic or physically signing it, because generally RINs have a combination of both, but they always still have a wet signature. The notary is not actually notarizing them electronically. What happens is I send the package to Ellen. Ellen gets her package. We get up on some sort of audio visual type software, could be FaceTime, Zoom, GoToMeeting. I verify, I'm the notary, I verify that it's Ellen. I can physically see her. She can hold up the license, and there's a couple of things that I might follow depending on my state regulations, but it's not knowledge based. So it's visual based. So I see it's her. I actually physically, via audio visual, watch her sign the documents. And then what happens is she puts them in the mail or UPS or FedEx and gets them to me. Once I get them, I go ahead and I actually notarize them with a wet signature. There's no electronic notarization. And one of the questions we get all the time is, what date does that notary use? For those of you that were on last week, you probably remember we talked a little bit about this, but there's not actually any true guidance or regulations behind this. So since I am the notary and I watched Ellen sign it today, when I get it, I would use a notarized June 9th. So that's pretty much the rule of thumb that we've seen nationwide. That said, there may be a municipality or something that has actually put some sort of guidance in place, and the notary should know that. But what we've seen is it's the day that the borrower or the signer is actually signing the documents. So when I physically get that package, I notarize it, and then we send it off to all parties. So it's, it's a pretty big difference. Both are remote, if you will. One's electronic, one is not. That's really the best way to describe the two. A lot of people do want to know if RON is here to stay. I'm sure many of you have heard about the Secure Notarization Act of 2020. When this first came out back in March as an immediate response to COVID, everybody was following this, right? So what it really basically says, it says, hey, we are in a pandemic. People can't go anywhere. We don't want to halt the industry. So for all you states out there that don't allow RON, or even RIN for that case, but in this case it was specifically for RON, we are going to pass a federal law saying this is legislation on a federal level, and that as soon as it's passed, every notary in every state can do, electronic closings, remote electronic closings. So what happened was when it first came out, it ended up getting pushed back behind the stimulus bill. So you remember how long that stimulus bill took to go through. And so it's actually still awaiting a vote. And it's still awaiting a vote because what happened is in the meantime, a lot of the states that didn't have RON legislation took it upon themselves to create RON legislation. And they're not, waiting to hear or reliant on what's happening on this federal act. So not to say that they still won't pass it. I don't know, because honestly, it's kind of pointless at this point in time. Many states already passed their emergency RON bills. And at this point, I don't think the federal government is ready to step in and say, we are ready to nationally say that remote online notarization is okay and we're going to supersede states. So the verbiage in it doesn't supersede states. In states where it's allowed, if it's already allowed, you do have to follow those rules and guidelines. But if it's not, then you are able to use this to do RON. I don't think it's really going to get much more traction. What happened was they had to then change it and say, you know, listen, we had to go in and add all these national emergency declarations, all these national emergency temporary orders for RON, and we even had to add timing in and saying, hey, if yours ends April 1st, we can add 6 months. It's saying, no, you know, we only put this in place for this pandemic. We're 100% and we haven't passed it at a state level. So it is looking less likely to get accomplished. What is looking likely is all to the American Land Title Association, along with other trade association groups like the MBA notarization groups. They've been working to get a national model in place, not one that just says, hey, you can do RON even if your state doesn't say so, but more of a model in place for as states, more and more states adopt it, that the rules and regulations kind of look the same. So if you have interstate transactions, you don't have to deal with, you know, the models from one state versus another looking so different. So I feel like that's probably what this will get shifted back to, which is what they were working on prior to this. Virginia, of course, is kind of in a league of their own on this, but we'll see what happens. We'll see. I don't think that much is going to happen with this. Of course, I've been wrong many, many times, and they'll probably pass it this week, and you guys will all email me about it. So we'll have something new to talk about next time if they do. Okay, so a lot of people also do want to know what states do have permanent RON versus emergency legislation. I mean, here's what I'll tell you on this. It is a very fluid situation, right? It is something that changes all the time. So you have, right now, there's 24 states, at least my last check. This is information from American Land Title Association, who is a great resource for all real estate COVID information and for RON. So you can see the ones that are in the green, they have what we call permanent RON legislation. It's also important to know and understand too, just because the state has permanent RON legislation doesn't mean that prior to this whole COVID situation, they were actually had implemented or using it. So a lot of times it passes legislation or a governor signs off on it, then it's got to go to the attorney general. It's got to have all the rules and regulations, mean how are we going to do this in our city, in our states. So 24 states have permanent RON legislation, but that doesn't mean all 24 states are up and running and, you know, from this point forward, they're going to be full-blown RONs. It just means it's allowed, and in many of them, they're working on rules and regs and legislation behind it so that people have the same guidelines to follow. 47 states have authorized RON through existing law or emergency action. So that's pretty high percentage, right? So what that means is in our response to this whole pandemic and COVID-19, they said, okay, we need to figure out a way that people can do closings without going face to face, as they have to socially distance or quarantine. So they are allowing RONs to happen, even though they're saying this is not permanent, meaning this ends, June 30th, this ends this day, or so on and so forth. So it's important that people realize that if you've gotten in the habit of maybe doing RONs in your state, it may not be something that you're going to be able to continue to do. Not saying you won't. I think in some areas where it was initially put in place as an emergency or a temporary order, you will see that they will have a quicker adoption to RON than they may have before. And also you'll probably find that some of them will lift the temporary or emergency portion and just write some guidelines around it and leave it in place. So not all of them. And again, I don't know who's going to do what, and it changes all the time, but it is important to know that it's there, but a lot of them are temporary or emergency. So we get a lot of questions about, well, what about my state? How do I know? So just be mindful that, again, this is very fluid. It changes every day, as you well know. So just make sure you research rules and regulations in your state, right? That's a no-brainer. You should be doing that anyway. Whatever municipality you are working in and having transactions and purchase or sales or refis in, you need to know whether or not they accept your recordings. Just because a lender says you can do a RON doesn't mean that local county is going to take the electronic recording. So some of that due diligence is going to fall to you. There are so many different places you can go to find this information now, especially in our current state. One of which is the National Notary Association. If you go to their website, you can pull up your state and find the most current information. I personally, they can only keep up with as fast as it's coming in, right? So I personally would still check your local municipalities. It's your best resource. The American Land Title Association has an incredible COVID-19 page that they update all day, every day. They too also have a lot of e-recording, RON, RIN, state requirements and local municipalities, but at the end of the day, especially more rural type counties and whatnot, you should really be checking with where you do business. If they're closed, that's another thing you need to find out. Can you still record, and if so, how? And then, like I said, it's just fluid. So just check constantly. Always make sure you're up to date. Just because something is not allowed today doesn't mean it's not allowed tomorrow, and vice versa. So, okay. So people ask us a lot for, who should I use? Do you have any recommendations for a remote online notarization company? The answer is they're all pretty much the same, right? So we have integrated with Expedite with Black Knight, which we went over a long time ago, and you can also, reach out. We can happily get you that information. But at the end of the day, there's just a couple things to think of. One, underwriter review, and I put it on here twice because it is very important. So if you are considering a third-party remote online notarization software, please, please, please make sure your underwriter has approved them. Not every underwriter is approving all platforms. So I don't know which underwriters are approving which ones, so it would fall to you. It's a very common question. A lot of them have it right on their website. So I would not get that information secondhand anyway. If I were you, I would reach out to your underwriter and say, hey, we're looking at platform A, B, and C. Are they approved by you? And do you have a preference? If you don't, if internally you don't care, then see what the underwriter says. Also, you need to analyze risk, demand, and expense, right? So the next two kind of go hand in hand, like research before you spend, which I'll chat in a second. But what's the risk? Meaning, what you're going to get out of it versus what you have to put into it. Also, demands, are you getting a lot of requests for RON closings? Because just because it's passed and just because people have used it here and there, it doesn't necessarily mean it's a benefit to you, right? In some areas, like it's happened. That's pretty much how almost every closing is happening. In some areas, and some of our customers are telling us, like, we've done one in 6 months. If you've done one in 6 months, it's probably not, beneficial for you to invest all this money. You should just work with your underwriter and see if there's a different option, or work with your lender to see if you can use who they're using. So, don't run out and spend money and say, oh, I got to get this software, and then you don't even know if you're ever really going to use that platform or what kind of return you're going to have. So research before you spend. Not only research whether or not you have the demands and that you understand the risk of using it, but also just some pretty standard questions, right? How does it work? How much does it cost? What's the implementation time? What's my turnaround time? How many available notaries do you have in my area? Can you even do business in my area? Not all platforms can do business because they don't have RON notaries in specific areas. Remember, a lot of this is new to them in areas because they don't have any they didn't have people doing them in those areas before, and now it's allowed. So just keep, ask those questions. And then again, I reiterate, verify the provider is approved by your underwriter. I mean, you don't want to spend all that time and money and then the underwriter say nope. Also, talk to your lenders. If you do business with a lot of repeat lenders, go ahead and talk to them, see who they recommend and who they're most comfortable with. And then the last thing I'll say with this before we move on is, if you are used to doing the notaries yourself, if you're being the notary within your office, you don't use an outside notary service, please make sure that whatever platform you're using allows that. Many don't, because their notaries have actually been certified as remote online notaries. It is a different process. Many states or municipalities have requirements that you need to do or meet before you can do a RON that are different than a wet signature standard notary. So do your research, make sure that it's allowed, and if it's allowed, make sure that your in-house notary has met all those requirements. So you want to make sure that if you spend that time and money, you're obviously going to be able to use it. So, okay, you made it through. We're done our RON. I promise I'm not going to talk about it much anymore. I might throw it in a few other places, but we're going to move on to what I think is some fun stuff, which is the housing market. So the housing market, we get asked all the time. I think everybody in our industry, I'm sure you guys get asked this all the time as well, right? What's it look like? What's happening? Going into this, I know it seems like 10 years ago, but a couple months ago, we had a pretty strong real estate market, right? Stronger than it had been in a long time. It was a seller's market for a change. It had been buyer's market over the years. We're seeing, these low interest rates, and it was a hot market, and people were buying, selling, which is great for us. Then you introduce those low rates. Now we've got refinances on top of all the purchases. So overall, for us as an industry, things looked really great. Then COVID hit, right? Nobody really knew what to do. And then suddenly everything is shut down. So, everybody's experience has been a little different because every state or city has handled it different. As I mentioned early on, I live in Chicago. We had some of the toughest guidelines in the country. We actually literally just went into our first phase of reopening, and it's not reopening. It's if you're outside, that's okay, but you can't still go in anywhere, do anything. So, what we've gone through here is very different than per se maybe somebody in Georgia and maybe someone in Texas or Washington, or so everyone's kind of had their own experience and is going to have different levels of how they've been affected. But this is more of just a national overlook. So I thought this was a fun fact. 53% of home buyers that were recently surveyed this past week are more likely to buy a home in the next year because of COVID-19. I don't think I saw that coming, and then when I figured out why and was looking at all the reasons, I thought, oh, that makes such perfect sense. So overall, most economists and people in our industry are saying the housing market should rebound fairly quickly. And it's partially because we were coming off of a really good market, right? Unemployment is starting to go down in a lot of areas as things reopen. People are back at work. So, it's very different than the recession that we saw in 08 and 09. So we overall are expected to have a pretty quick rebound. Now, some people are telling me we don't have anything to rebound from. We never saw a dip. Other people are saying we saw a huge dip, and we are looking forward to rebounding. So why are home buyers saying that because of COVID-19 they want to buy? Well, one is, and I think most of us can relate to this, they're tired of the small space they're living in. They've been quarantined for, we've been quarantined for 4 months as of today. If you're living in a small space and you're used to being out and about, that's something that people are starting to think about now, and they're saying, I don't want to live in here a small space. I want to go ahead and look at maybe buying something bigger. Working remotely has opened up so many opportunities for people. We're going to talk about working remotely and whether it's here to stay, but in many cases, more people will continue to work remotely. And what happens is they can now look outside of commuting zones, right? So if they're paying top dollar to rent in the city, they can go to the suburbs and buy, or a more rural area, and buy a house because they don't have to worry about that, daily commute anymore. So a lot of them said that's a big reason. Obviously, low rates. Come on. Right now, the average mortgage rate for a 30-year fix, at least yesterday, was 3.15. Obviously, they vary depending on the loan and the borrower, but they're historically low. I think this may be the lowest that they've ever been while tracking it. Quarantine also decreased spending. So a lot of buyers have more money. They have down payments. They have increased savings. They feel more comfortable investing because they have money in the bank, where before they maybe didn't want to stretch themselves too thin because they had nothing to fall back on. Well, they're in quarantine. People aren't going out. People aren't spending as much. So, in general, most people with the exception, obviously, of people who have maybe lost their job or whatnot. But most people who are been lucky enough to not been too affected by this have more money coming out of COVID-19 than they did going in. Also, in some areas, they've seen, especially cities or what we call hotspots, if you will. So, like New York City, parts of California, those are areas that COVID hit pretty hard, right? And so, what they're seeing is a decreased home prices. So now they're saying, okay, normally I couldn't afford to buy right there, but because of COVID, I got more money in the bank. I'm going to work remotely and I can now afford to buy here because the prices have decreased because of the pandemic. Please understand that that is not a norm throughout the country. In most areas, prices have already started going up, and it's because you have buyers willing and ready to buy. So you also have to think about, sellers who pulled houses off the market and are now putting them back, and we're going to talk about that as well. So overall, from this snapshot, things look really good, right? It's okay. At least we have something positive. We've got low rates. We've got people with more money. We've got people who want to buy because they've been stuck in their, smaller spaces for quite some time. Another thing I don't have on here, but I'll add in is current renters that maybe had some struggles through this, but didn't get help from their landlords overwhelmingly responded that they have no interest in renting again when their lease is up, that they didn't like being reliant on a landlord. They really wanted to kind of, control their own destiny, if you will. So I do think you'll see a lot of renters who didn't have a good experience through this with their management company or landlord look to maybe buy these homes as well. So according to a new survey from NAR, they found 65% of people who had already attended an open house, meaning pre-COVID, would go into an open house today, no problem. Now, I bet if you had asked them that a month ago, they would not be as high of percentage, but you have to keep in mind things are opening up, right? So, we in Chicago have envy of the rest of the country of things opening up. We see people eating out and at beaches, and we just know one day we'll be there. But with the reopening of the economy, it's not just the ability, it's the peace of mind. So 2 months ago, a buyer might say, I'm not comfortable putting my money here. I don't know what's going to happen, right? So now they're starting to see things happen, some sort of normalcy, businesses are reopening, people are getting jobs back, so they have more confidence in their investment. So you have that percentage of buyers that were kind of sitting on the fence during this that are now leaning towards buying instead of not. It doesn't mean every buyer is. It just means in general, people who were already thinking about maybe buying are now seeing that, things are moving on. Not that COVID is gone. Please don't think that I'm saying that. We're going to talk about that. But just the economy itself and the cities and states are reopening. So people are more open to actually purchase homes. The fact that 65% of them are interested in going to an actual physical open house. I mean, honestly, I think part of that is people are just tired of being home. They want to get out. They want to see things. They don't want to virtually see it anymore, right? So just two things to kind of think about here. And as we see more and more states going to further phases of reopening, I think we'll see the real estate market rebound pretty quickly in those areas as well. Well, I just spread like a really pretty picture. I just said everything's great. We're rays of sunshines. There's unicorns flying around. So what's going on? How come, I don't have all this business? Well, I mean, there does, have some problems that come along with all the goods. So first of all, buyers will be facing historically low housing inventory due to COVID. So many sellers have pulled their houses off the market because they don't want people in and out of them, right? And they also didn't want it to sit for 2-3 months and then post COVID-19, a buyer will say, oh, they've been trying to sell this for, 200 days and blah, blah, blah. I'm going to lowball them. So the housing inventory was already uh, low. That's why it's a seller's market. It was already low going into COVID, but really, now it's historically low. I think they said there's like less than 3 months worth of inventory when generally our industry carries 10 months of inventory in a normal market. So that's a really big deal. So you have these really low rates, so you have people running out to get these mortgages and they've got money to spend. There's not the inventory. And what happens every time we have low inventory, we get what? Inflated prices, right? So we have people out there in especially hot markets in areas that um, maybe would not have been as affordable, like we just talked about, New York, San Francisco, hot spots. People are going in and bidding, and they're getting in bidding wars. So now you're going to end up with inflated prices in hot markets, and then even not hot markets, the prices are rising. Second home prices, people were trying to unload them because the uncertainty of the economy, and now people are just buying them up left and right. So you're going to see a surge in second home purchases, and you're going to see a surge in those prices as well. So, it's all of it's good except for the fact that when we don't have inventory, it leads to high prices, bidding wars. Bidding wars also cause what? Higher prices that maybe the buyer can now not qualify for. Also appraisal issues. We've been there, right? I'll pay this for it. Well, you're getting a loan, so the appraiser's got to come in and say it's worth it. So it is a domino effect, obviously a trickle effect of all the other good stuff, but just something to keep in mind is, there's areas where we've talked to people where they said my last 5 closings were all sight unseen purchases because they were so afraid they were going to go off the market. We actually sold a house. Share this. We sold a house amidst COVID, and not only did we sell it, but we did get over ask price, which was crazy. We got 5 offers in one day, and it closed like 15 days ahead of schedule because the buyers were so afraid what might happen during COVID, they wanted to get it closed. So it's a really interesting market. There's so much good, but we do have to keep an eye on the inventory and make sure that we don't overinflate these prices because people are then not going to qualify and appraisals are not going to be mad as well. So another sign, whether we like it or not, that the real estate market is picking up is iBuying. iBuying kind of came into a lot of areas, Atlanta, Dallas, Fort Worth, Raleigh. Um, it's not something that we love in the real estate industry by any means, but this is an actual sign that's saying, okay, iBuying is back, meaning Zillow, Open Door, all of them. I just picked these two. So Open Door is reopening in 7 markets nationwide. For those of you that maybe don't deal with iBuying or haven't followed it, both Open Door and Zillow completely shut down their iBuying when this COVID thing started. They stopped doing it. They said no more. So the fact that they're ready to go back into these markets is a sign that the real estate market is picking up. It's also a sign that with low inventory, there's going to be less for your traditional borrower to go out and buy directly from real estate agents and sellers. So Open Door is reopening in 7 markets nationwide, and they plan to reopen in 20 additional markets in the coming months. That's a lot. They've made some changes. I mean, I don't want to spend too much time going over all this. So they launched 3 digital, you would think I work at a technology company, I could figure out how to not get that side email thing to pop up, but trust me, I have nothing open. I have followed everything IT has told me to do. So I'm sure all of you that have on here every week are used to seeing my little emails pop up, but I apologize for that. Anyway, so they've changed. They have some different guidelines. Like, for example, Open Door has launched 3 digital contact-free products to help customers buy and sell homes amid physical distancing guidelines. So just because they reopened doesn't mean they're throwing open houses and people are in and out or anything like that. Same with Zillow. They're resuming in 12 markets nationwide. They're not allowing any open houses. They have new health and safety measures, meaning when they buy a home from a seller, one of the things they're doing is sending in a crew to clean and disinfect it. And then, of course, increase virtual options. So it's back. They wouldn't be back if they didn't think the market was going to pick up. So while we might not like dealing with the iBuying aspect of it from a closing end of it, it is a good sign for our industry as a whole. All right, so we talked about some of this stuff, but we can't go over all this stuff and not talk about the effect COVID has on stuff. So contactless showings are going to be a thing. It's going to be where the realtor goes in, unlocks the door, goes and sits in their car, no more than 4 people or 2 people, depending on the state or whatnot, will go then and view the home, come out, and then they will socially distance and discuss it. So the days of hopping in a car with a realtor or meeting and showing the house together, we're not back to that by any means. It's, most states that are even allowing showings have some sort of guidance of social distancing and contactless showings. Open houses right now are just not happening. Virtually, but for sure not happening. Might be something in the future, but it's definitely not something that people are going to now. Also, there's a lot of limitations on how many people can be in one place at a time, so that's another reason. Virtual listings are definitely going to continue. Even people that want to go look at the houses, are going to really do their due diligence online, and they're going to um, narrow down a lot more than maybe would in the past. So if I was normally going to go look at 10 houses, I might narrow that down because I can virtually see them and take tours virtually down to 3, maybe 4, to limit the houses I'm going in and out of and such. Limited people for showings. I know Michigan is a good example of that. They can have no more than 4 people at the showing at a time, and they have to socially distance. Not all sellers really want people in their house right now either. So there is a lot of talk about new disclosures for COVID-19, meaning do we think that states or local municipalities are going to require sellers to disclose if anyone has had COVID-19 within the house? So as of right now, I don't know of any. And if there are some, they might just be doing it as a, hey, no one here had it type thing, but there's not an actual requirement that people need to disclose that. Not to say it won't happen, but right now there is not. I mean, it would be tough, I think. I mean, you have the whole HIPAA thing, so it's not technically an environmental thing where they could get away with it, but who knows? It's on the table. We'll see what happens. COVID's been a big boost for rural real estate. People don't necessarily want to run and buy a house in hotspots, when hotspots are generally bigger cities, right? You have Detroit, New York City, even Chicago, Atlanta, San Francisco, LA. So people are saying, hey, if I can work from home and I can afford more outside of the city, I don't really want to be where the largest points of infections are. So it actually is causing people to go look for more rural real estate. And then iBuying, of course, we just talked about, but there may be a lot more iBuying. Than sellers don't want to deal with buyers coming in and out of their house, so they're just going to call up Zillow and Open Door and say, hey, what's your offer, and not deal with it. So kind of just an overall picture of COVID's effect on the real estate. All right, so I'm not going to spend too much time talking about the mortgage market, as it is not my area of expertise, but I know a little, so I'll share my little with you. One is, mortgage applications for purchases are rising. We saw a huge influx of refinances over COVID, simply because the rates were so low, right? So people decided to do a lot of refinances. I will say refinancing with cash out was difficult for a lot of people, just because of tightened mortgage requirements, but refinances as a whole was up, and that was helpful to our industry, right? It's a closing, so it's a transaction. Right now, we are seeing a slight decrease in refinance loan, and that's to be expected. We usually only see them for well, 3, 4, 5 months, and then kind of goes down and up, down and up. Purchase applications were up 18% compared to the same time last year. This past summer into the fall was really when the real estate market really picked up nationwide. Again, everybody has a different experience based on where you're at. And they were actually up 6% from a week ago. Why? Because we have historically low rates, right? People have a little bit more money, at least the people who want to go out and buy. And then also, a good sign for the mortgage industry is that the CARES Act forbearance requests have dropped across all investor type loans for over 8 consecutive weeks. So for those of you that don't know, this is where people could contact their lender. The government said if they've been impacted by COVID-19 or having financial difficulty during this time, you can work with them so that they don't have to pay their mortgage for up to 12 months, depending on what the circumstances are. So the fact that the requests for them have gone down over the past 8 weeks is also a very good sign for the mortgage market as well. The CARES Act and the forbearances is really what caused all the new COVID-19, and the CARES Act is what has made getting a mortgage a lot tougher right now than it was 6 months ago. So obviously, here's your downside, right? Low inventory leads to high prices, making it harder for buyers to qualify for mortgages. Inflated home prices lead to appraisal issues. And then obviously, social distancing requirements may cause appraisal issues. So there are a lot of lenders now saying no more drive-by appraisals, right? So we got to figure a way to get you in there. We're not going to appraise the house because we don't feel like it's, good enough. So that's something to keep an eye on. So I'm just kind of going over the COVID effect on each of these. So the biggest effect that COVID has had on the mortgage industry is one, that they were required to allow those forbearances. That's a lot of money for especially private lenders that are holding those loans. So think about the lenders that are holding jumbo loans. More times than not, when a lender issues a jumbo loan, they're not selling that in a secondary market. They hold on to those, right? And so now somebody with these massive jumbo loans can't pay their mortgage. So they have to qualify for the forbearance, but it was fairly easy to qualify for it. And so these lenders are not getting the money that they need to sustain their normal day-to-day operations. Also, COVID-19 with causing such an economic slowdown, you have people who lost their jobs, you have businesses that shut down. You have businesses working at limited capacity. So from a lender standpoint, they're saying, well, we can't. We've got to make some changes. We have to make sure that the buyers that are actually applying for these loans are going to be able to pay for them. So they have increased minimum credit scores. So your credit is more critical than ever. Gone are the days of 600 or even 620 for loans. It's rising. Your debt to income ratio requirements are lower as well. They don't want you to have a lot of debt because they just went through this where people couldn't pay their bills. Cash out refinances have much stricter requirements simply because they don't know where the market was heading and they didn't know if the equity was going to stand in the houses. That's longer review times. They're really, going over these applications with a fine-tooth comb. Reserves are becoming more important. I mean, that makes perfect sense, right? People losing their jobs, but they don't have any money in the bank, can't pay a mortgage. So since they've literally just lived that, they're saying, hey, listen, if you don't have a certain amount of money in the bank, you really can't qualify for this loan, because what happens if you lose your job? We're not out of this yet. Verifications of employment are with 24 hours of funding. And then another one in here is, the reason obviously for that is people are losing their jobs left and right. They want to make sure that they're actually still employed. Self-employment has changed quite a bit. It's a very difficult loan to get right now. It used to be you could prove back to 120 days for your self-employment income, and now it's 10 days, because 120 days ago you may have still been doing a lot of work pre-COVID or right at the beginning of this, and now you're not doing any. So now if you want to get a loan for the self-employed people of the world, it's 10 days verification. So that's a big change. There's also two new documents that they're requiring that Fannie and Freddie, I believe, are requiring as well. And it's a lot to document for a self-employed loan. So who's most affected by these tightening of mortgage applications? Well, obviously borrowers with lower credit scores, self-employed borrowers, which I just talked about, jumbo mortgage applicants. Some lenders have completely stopped doing jumbo loans, and with good reason. Like I said, they don't generally sell them, or if they do, it's not as easy to sell, and people aren't buying them right now. So right now it's very difficult without a huge down payment to get a jumbo mortgage, and many of your bigger lenders like Quicken and Wells Fargo and have completely suspended it. They said it'll come back, but more when the economy is back at a full. And then applicants with low down payments. I mean, even your strong applicants with good, good to very good credit are being required to put 20% down, where before they would maybe be able to put 3 or 5 or 10. So every lender has different rules and regulations, but it does have an impact on who is buying what, obviously. So just something to think about, that borrowers are having to work a little harder for their mortgages in today's environment. Okay, so just as a whole, like we call it the COVID effect in our industry, one of the things we've been talking to a lot of customers about recently, and what I've been talking to a lot of people just in general is, as states are starting to open up and as businesses are getting back to what, normal, if you will, what is normal? This has been an unprecedented time for our industry, right? So, okay, I am in a state that is going to allow us to come back into the office sooner than later. So, I mean, obviously, there's been settlement agents and attorneys and title companies operating, and people have been at the office because they've been doing these drive up closings and all these different crazy stuff that you guys have had to do. But just going back to kind of a norm of people working in the office versus from home, there's going to be all sorts of safety measures that need to be taken into account for, right? You still have to have social distancing. So if you are in a small office, that's going to be very difficult. Also, when and how, like how do you make that decision? So these are just things to kind of think through. And what you can use to think through is, how have you really been affected? Like, does it really matter if you guys are 100% back in the office, or is there a percentage of employees that are killing it at home? I really don't need them at the office, let alone maybe every day. Maybe they can do both. But so that's something to think about. Like, can I keep a percentage of my staff remote and still, be operating at what I want to operate at? A question a lot of people are asking is, our company is going to downsize their brick and mortar space. So if I have 50 employees and I found that 25 of them are really good at working from home and I don't need them in the office and they want to work from home, I don't need space for 50 anymore. So it's actually could be a cost effective to allow them to stay from home, working from home. Then you're going to have a whole subset of employees who are just not comfortable returning, and that's okay, right? There may come a time where everything is reopened and COVID has kind of plateaued, and you can actually say either you have to come in or you can't have a job. But right now, that would be very difficult. So you have to factor in that maybe someone doesn't want to stay remote long term, but they're just not quite there yet as far as coming in. Remember, everyone's had their own experiences, known people who's had it, or lost people, or lost jobs, or so on and so forth. So we do have to be very sensitive and mindful that everybody's kind of got a different take on it, and that's okay. But just something to kind of think about when you're thinking about reopening your offices. So what does a closing look like during COVID-19 and post COVID-19? Well, we've talked about this before. We've talked about the drive-by closings, also the closings that are in office but separate rooms, and nobody's within 10 feet of each other. And we've talked about Ron and Rin, and so I don't think a lot of that's going to change too much. I think maybe you'll have less drive-up closings and people will start coming back into the office, but I don't think we're going to have 10 people sitting around the closing table. I think people are going to be in masks. I think that people in the title companies and settlement agent organizations are going to have to, have some sort of process in place that they wipe everything down, provide masks for people who don't have them. It's going to be a different environment for quite some time, and so I think we just kind of need to embrace it to make it work. And I think our industry does that very well, proven by the fact that you all have been able to continue business through this craziness. I mean, whoever thought honestly that many of you would be setting up little canopy tents outside and customers would be doing drive-through closings? I mean, it's fantastic what you all have done. And I have no doubt moving forward, you guys will find a way to make any rules and regulations work within your office. Just a few things to kind of think through, like what your process will be. And some people will want to know your process. Some people, before they come in, are going to say, okay, so what's your process? Like, do you wipe it all down? Is every pen new? Is everyone wearing a mask? Or will I be separated? So kind of maybe start thinking about documenting that, because people are definitely going to ask. So I think it's important that you think that through. Remote working, the new norm. So for those of you that don't know, I have worked for SoftPro for ever, 18 years. Oh, that's crazy. 18 years. And I have worked remotely for 17 and a half of those. So this is not my new norm. It has been my norm. I generally do travel quite a bit. So working from home is very easy for me. I like it. It's not for everyone. I tell you, I happen to be married to someone who it is not for. He is not as productive. He likes going to the office. He likes the structure. So it's definitely not for everyone. But there is a lot of things to consider. So we just talked about reopening and how you're going to go about it. And some of you may have never closed, but you're not working at 100% capacity in office. And some of you maybe are reopening. So it really just depends. But when you have employees working from home, we just talked about this, it's cost effective. They're not taking up space in your office. So there is that factor. Employees also save money because they're not commuting. They're not eating out. So employees are generally, especially new hires, I mean, I'm not looking for you to cut somebody's salary, but new hires are generally apt to take less money as a salary if they are able to work from home because they are able to save money elsewhere. It also is not as stressful. They're not commuting back and forth. So in cities, bigger areas, or even rural where they have to drive an hour each way, it does cut that time back and it gives them back to the employee. I think we've all found through this whole COVID pandemic that we have the technology to keep us all connected. I'll tell you again, 17 and a half years I've worked remote. I have never once felt removed. I have never once felt not part of a team. Between all of the audio visual, the Zooms, the go-to meetings, the go-to webinars, even house party, you name it, Google Hangout, there's a way to stay connected through the technology, and it's even easier and less expensive than it's ever been in the past. So employees sometimes feel a lot more productive at home. I know I do. There's no constantly going in and out of meetings. There's no one popping into your office to talk. There's no stopping in the break room to have, a conversation with somebody. They also don't say, oh, okay, it's 12 o'clock. I'm going to go take my lunch from 12 to 1. Generally, a mindset of working from home is, this is what I have to get done today, and I'm going to do everything I can do to get it done. It's a proven fact, when you allow people to work from home, you have less turnover. People are going to think long and hard about leaving a job for another job when they have to give up the convenience of working from home, especially someone who has a spouse that may travel or has children. It's just something that makes their life a lot easier. It also allows you as a company to have access to global talent. So if I am allowing people to work remote and I'm here in Chicago and there's a great candidate in either in Southern Illinois or Missouri or Minnesota or Wisconsin or Pennsylvania for that matter, I can hire them. I don't need them in my office. So it opens up a lot more opportunities for your firms, especially for jobs where they really don't need to come in. So, maybe you could hire some of your marketing team remotely, or your searchers or your typers, whatever it is you're doing. It does open up the pool of candidates when you don't have to hire people who can drive in and out of the office every day. And then, of course, COVID-19, people are going to be less likely to be running back to the office because they just don't feel comfortable. So for the record, I'm not telling you all that your employees should work remotely. I'm just saying our industry did not really embrace it prior to this. And the feedback that I've heard from many, many customers is they cannot believe how productive their employees have been from home. So if that's the case, maybe rethink your structure. And this is a great perk, and it's a great selling point for your company. And you don't have to have them work, remotely 100%. It could be some in the office, some out type thing. So just think about it. I know it's kind of new to our industry, but I think with everything we've gone through, it's pretty clear who should be in the office and who should be at home, right? Okay, so I did tell you that the CFPB is actually still in existence, and there's not much to really talk about. They have been pretty quiet. Really, all they've done is that they've worked with, say, FHFA, they've worked with HUD, and they're just kind of continuing their role as consumer protection. So they are providing guidance for consumers. You can go to their website and say, how do I get mortgage relief? Even as a renter, what type of protection do I have? They're offering stuff on how to avoid COVID-19 scams and financial scams from people. So they're not implementing any like new rules and regulations. They're just kind of there to help the consumer, which is, what they should be doing. So they've got a COVID page on their website, which is consumerfinance.gov. And it is pretty helpful. If you have anybody that really needs some help with their mortgage forbearance or relief options, it's pretty user friendly, and it takes them exactly where they need to go. They also provide a lot of flexibility to financial companies and for reporting, if you will. So they are postponing data collections from a lot of industry partners and unregulated rules, so that they would normally say collect this data quarterly. They're saying, okay, we're just going to collect it once a year. So they're not saying we're not going to get the information. They're just saying you don't need to worry about it right now, so that you can work with your consumers and your business. So don't worry about reporting this stuff to us. So they're not expecting that quarterly information on HMDA, even Reg C from the mortgage lenders, which is a pretty big relief to these lenders who are trying to deal with all this forbearance from the CARES Act. So it's been good that they've loosened the reins. Again, please, all rules and regulations are still in effect. It's just they're kind of taking a hands off of the supervisory role and saying, okay, let's get through this together. We'll help the consumer, and then we'll go back to normal. They have stepped in with the CARES Act pretty strongly, and they are definitely warning servicers on how they guidance borrowers, because obviously a servicer is not going to want too many borrowers to have forbearance, because then they're not getting the money. It's understandable, but the government and the stimulus act and the CFPB and all say no, they hang up to 12 months. It's pretty tough for a lender to say no, to be quite honest. I mean, there's many cases you can't even ask if they were fired or not, if they've lost their job or not lost their job, if they were laid off or if they're having financial, the burden is not on the borrower. So they're trying to warn the servicers and saying, don't ask leading questions. You're there to help them. You have to follow these rules. So they are still watching them and issuing guidance. It's just not as strong and stringent as it's been in the past. So you guys made it. You made it through an entire hour of me talking. I apologize. I generally have been trying to have other people on, but sometimes I just have to do it all so that we can get through it. Hopefully it was informative. Again, if you have any questions, feel free to send them. I think we may have had a couple come in. I'll ask Ellen in a minute. And if we don't get to them again, we will email them to you. So moving on to probably the best part of the day is our refreshments and recipes. Fun fact, this right here is actually not my recipe. It is one of my favorites though, but my daughter, who recently turned 13, makes this for us all the time. It's kind of her recipe. It came from a cooking club thing she was in, but I'll tell you, it's some of the best Spanish paella and it's so easy to make. Also, the sangria is one of my favorites in the summertime. We like to switch it up and do white. You do not have to use schnapps or brandy if you just want to use the white wine. I would also say then maybe use a flavored club soda if you don't want that much alcohol in it. And actually, if you don't want any alcohol in at all, you can use club soda or ginger ale with everything else and make it obviously kid friendly. So this is one of my favorite recipes in our house that I don't have to make. I have made it, but she makes it for us, and I have 3 children who all love it. I would love to know if anyone makes it. I love when you guys send me, um, the information and updates of what you are and aren't making. So I know we're kind of near the end here, and I just wanted to check in with Ellen to see if we have any questions. And if so, if there's any that you want me to answer.
Hey, Leslie, we did receive a couple of questions during the webinar. I was able to just answer them one off. One of the questions was asking for the presentation slides. So just a reminder, we do record every one of these webinars and we make the video recording and the presentation slides available on our blog, and everybody who registered and attended this webinar will receive an email with that information as well. So you guys should receive that in the next day or two. So keep an eye out for that if you're looking for the recording or the slides. And other than that, we didn't get any specific questions about the content, which just speaks to your fantastic presentation skills, Leslie, I think. But if anybody has any follow-up questions, feel free to reach out to Leslie or I at any point.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, Ellen, and thank you everybody for joining us. We will send a recap just like Ellen said, and we will include a link to the slides. And if anyone has any questions post this, please feel free to reach out. We appreciate when you spend your Tuesday mornings with us, and we will see you next week.